So good morning, good evening, good day, good night, wherever you are on the planet. This is John Dupuy, and with the Spiritual Technologies 2.0 Summit. And I have an old friend and comrade with us today, Ryan Parks, who is the co-producer of the Superhuman Operating System with Ken Wilber. And I have been a big supporter of that since it initiated, and I'm glad I have been, because in my travels in the United States and Europe, people keep coming up to me or emailing me and contacting me, telling me how this thing has really changed their lives in a very powerful way. And just one more note, Ryan, before we get into this, is when I was first thinking about Spiritual Technologies 2.0, I was thinking, well, technology, isn't that an artifact? You know, a thing, a box, an electronic, something. And I got thinking, I actually looked up the definition, and no, it's not. And the Superhuman Operating System is based on the Aqua Map by Ken Wilber, which has been just foundational in changing my life and my work. And in a conversation with Ken one time, he said, you know, the model itself, the Superhuman Operating System, the Aqua Map, is psychoactive. It actually changes you from the inside out. So with that, thank you for being here, Ryan.
Thank you, John. It's great to be here. And I just also want to say I'm a co-producer of Superhuman OS with my partner, Leaf, and our other partner, Todd, who helped co-fund the project. So I want to make sure that all of us are present today.
Yeah, it's been a tremendously successful endeavor, and I'm just really, really glad to be associated with it and helping to get it out through our community and just supporting the whole thing. So maybe you can, before we kind of get into that, maybe you can say a little bit about yourself and your history and how you came to be the co-producer of this powerful internal technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say it's an honor myself to be a part of it. I come from a small city in northern Minnesota, Duluth, Minnesota. It's beautiful. And when I was about 19 years old, I had a spiritual experience that I didn't have any context to really understand. I had come through the Lutheran church and Lutheran youth group. And when I had the expansive, infinite experience that I had, I didn't really have a language to be able to talk about it or to understand what had happened to me. And I went into a period of seeking after that to try to really understand what that was. And I didn't really find language for it or to understand it until through a series of interesting and synchronistic coincidences, I happened on Ken Wilber's work. And that was 12 years ago. And I started listening to a program that Ken taught, and instantly I knew that it was really extremely significant, that he had some really powerful material to share with the world. And then also it helped me really understand what had happened for me. And that kind of set me on the path that I am on today, and then ultimately led me to working with Ken and helping him create a course that teaches the essentials of his material, which had really become a passion of mine for the past 13 years now, because when I experienced the value that it created for me, I really wanted to share it with other people. So after that, I got very excited, enthusiastic about it, and I wanted to get involved with it. And I went out to Boulder, where Ken's institution was, and tried to connect with some people and get involved. And fortunately, I met some people that gave me the opportunity to join at one of the events that they were producing back in 2005 and 2006, the Integral Institute events, which is where I met you.
Right.
So it's been 10 years now.
Yeah. And I think you're like maybe a couple of years ahead of me or so. I think I've been at it about 11 or 12 years with this, basically where the integral model or the Superhuman Operating System was born back in those days.
Yeah. And it's powerful too. I think you and I, we met, we were both pretty enthusiastic.
Yeah, well, I've been off on my own, having spiritual experiences and reading Ken's work and getting my mind blown, and but not a heck of a lot of anybody understood what I was talking about. Poor Pat
Yeah.
would be in bed, and I'd be sitting there reading sex ecology, spirituality, and go, ooh, ooh, ooh. It's just like, I'm trying to sleep. Writing notes, and so I think I went through almost all of Ken's work in about 8 or 9 months, which was a lot. And
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I mean, a lot of people have that experience when they start to learn Ken's work. They really want to share it with other people because it's really expanding. And so that was part of the reason why I wanted to create something like Superhuman OS, is because oftentimes when people are looking for what to share or how to share integral, we would run through our head and be like, well, this is good, that's kind of good, but I wanted something that would just get right to the essentials and help people out with that.
So what are we talking for the people listening to this who may not be familiar with Ken Wilber, or when we talk about the Superhuman Operating System, what is it exactly did you produce? And if somebody wants it, what do they get? And just give us a little of the mechanics of it.
Yeah, well, Superhuman OS is a 10-week online training that teaches the essentials of Ken's integral operating system, his aqua model, and how to apply it in day-to-day living. So the URL for it is superhumanos.net. That's superhumanos.net, and that's Superhuman Operating System. And what it is, we'll have to get into this much more deeply about how this is an operating system and how mental models work, and that's kind of what we're here to talk about today. But Ken's work, you mentioned it, he's always called psychoactive, and that's really because when you start to learn the simple mental models, they start to change the way that you think and you see the world and you interpret information in a really helpful way. So for the people that don't know the integral model or integral theory, Superhuman OS is I would say the essential training in the integral operating system in Ken's, life work. So it's a 10-week online training, which I can share more about as we talk, but it specifically covers the elements of the integral operating system, which we'll talk a little bit more about right now, about why that's important. And it uses education. And I can actually show you a little bit about it. I'll just there and give you a look at what it is.
Yeah, and you're getting ready to have a new class starting here in the near future, correct?
Yeah, we have Ken's doing we're having Ken for a broadcast of an event called Your Superhuman Potential. And really, this is a way for us to actually talk about the fact that we're kind of entering into a new era of humanity. I'm playfully talking about that, where we're starting to reach some of the higher levels of development that haven't really been accessible to humanity at any time prior in history. And so this is just starting to be understood over the past 50 years and starting to come more and more evident as we grow. And we are doing a broadcast event of that on March 24th, and then we'll share more information about the upcoming training, superhumanos.net. That's going to be happening starting in mid-April.
Great. And when I first discovered this and I first met you, I was kind of in the born again integral phase, where your mind is completely blown. It's like, oh my God. And I think I was out like witnessing and testifying, trying to get people to look at this and really annoying people. I don't really do that anymore unless they ask me specifically, but it is something that the more you work with, the more you don't even think about it. It's just there. I mean, you're using the different lenses all the time. You go, oh, that's this, that, and the other. And to take that, it's like, it's almost I couldn't even imagine what my reality would be without it at this point.
Yeah.
I would be in such great despair. I'd probably be dead. Okay. It was a whole integral thing, an integral practice that actually saved my life because I was so deeply depressed. But yeah, so I don't even think I'd be having the conversation. But to go back, Ken said one time, it's like you're seeing the world as a square and all of a sudden the world becomes a cube. There's just this new dimensionality and everything shifts. And it allows us to be more skillful and hopefully compassionate. I suppose you could do the Darth Vader thing and use it for evil things, but I find most of the people that I find that are into this are actually pretty great folks, and doing it for noble reasons.
Yeah. I mean, I would say it definitely gives us access to a new dimension of our humanity. Mm-hmm. And sure, someone could turn to the dark side with that. It is kind of like Jedi powers, but for the most part, the hope is that, we can create the Jedi Council together.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah. So, do we want to actually talk about what the different lenses are, or how would you like, you want to talk about quadrants? Let me just say this. When I found this thing, I was working with alcoholics and addicts. And as soon as I saw this model, it was obvious to me that this was kind of the Rosetta Stone to understand alcoholism and addiction in ways that had never been possible before. And then, if you've been in that field, you're slugging through all this tragedy. And I mean, some good stuff happens too, but it's pretty dark. And even right now, the candidates have been, in the northeastern part of the United States, where they're just having a plague of heroin addiction, and oxycodone and oxycontin led the way being led by doctors who prescribe this stuff like candy, apparently, and they run out of prescriptions, and finally they go in the streets and start using heroin. And so anyway, it's just a huge problem. And when I saw this, everything just started falling into place. I started trying to contact the people that were doing integral recovery or applying this, and I couldn't find anybody. And so I said, oh my God, I'm going to have to do this. And I started writing papers, and it led to the book, which is still out there circulating. And it's one of those, books that just virally getting spread. Somebody reads it and gives it away, buys copies and stuff like that. So God is my marketer, or the universe is my marketer. And it just in that one field, recovering from addiction, this thing has just shed so much light on in a formerly just kind of confused mishmash of let's put a little bit of this. Oh, and when I first found this, of course, I'd been moving into holistic treatment. It can't be, AA is not enough. 12 steps not enough. You got to have diet. You got to consider that. You got to consider, exercise, blah, 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 all these different things, and maybe a little yoga, meditation, trying to throw it all to this kind of mishmashy thing. And when I found the Superhuman Operating System, or the integral map, it was holism with a map. All of a sudden, you can see how everything fit together, and the levels of human development and states of consciousness. And anyway, it's just amazing. So it completely changed my life. And I'm writing another book right now that's kind of taking everything we learned in integral recovery and applying it to everybody who has a body, or everybody who suffers, which is, most of us, I think.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. You've done really amazing work with it, John. And that's really helpful. For a lot of people. It's a huge service. So I just want to thank you for that. That's been very big. And that's the really exciting thing about it, is that as a tool, it can be applied to a lot of different specific areas to really expand the field itself. And so you've done that with recovery, and other people are doing that with education, and other people are doing that with economics and healthcare, and on and on. And that's what's really exciting about it. I think it would be helpful to take a moment before actually going into what the lenses are, the frameworks are, to actually just talk about what makes it a technology, as opposed to just something that you learn, because there are a lot of things that we can learn, and then there are the integral operating system, the superhuman operating system, is an inner technology, which is kind of distinct. So I just wanted to make that distinction right now.
Sure.
Before we jump into it. So a mental model or a mental framework is something that we learn, and once we learn it, it's kind of like installing a new piece of software. It changes the way that we interpret information. It changes the way our brain works. And we've already got a lot of them operating right now. For the most part, most people listening to this do. If you can read, you have a mental model, piece of mental software operating, and that's the alphabet. You've learned it once. You now, before learning the alphabet, and before the alphabet was invented and shared commonly around the world, if you were to look at letters on paper, it wouldn't mean anything. It would just be a bunch of symbols, that had no significance. But once you learn the alphabet, all of a sudden, these random symbols that seem to have no significance, and there are only 26 of them. It's really finite. It's not like there's a billion letters. There's 26. But with those 26 symbols, you can now instantaneously, anytime you're presented with any letters, translate them into meaning. So that installation of that mental framework changes the way that your brain works. It changes the way your mind works, and it changes the way that you interpret information. And out of that, that can be considered a spiritual technology, reading and writing. And sacred scripture has come out of that. And that was kind of the first thing that kind of massively came out of reading and writing was sacred scripture. And a lot of the modern world's religions right now that are the biggest religions exist as a result of the alphabet being able to spread the information. And so that would be like a spiritual technology 1.0. It's been around for a while. If you don't know how to read and write, I would recommend you do as a spiritual technology, but they're teaching it to children. So most people know. Numbers are another one. You learn 1 through 10, or 1 through 0, 0 through 9. And then you have a technology to add, subtract, divide, and math is another one. So when you learn addition and subtraction and division, you can now balance your checkbook, or pay your rent because
or go to the moon.
Or go to the moon.
Yeah.
The technology of numbers is another mental framework. Once you learn it, it changes the way you interpret information, but you don't have to keep learning it. It's not a learning path. It's something that you learn and you install once, and once you fully get it, it changes the way you interpret things. Calendars and time, that's another one. So these are mental models, and they constitute our operating system. So most of us have numbers, letters, time, clocks, calendars. These are part of our operating system that every day we go through the world, interacting with the world, and use those to some degree one way or another. But we learned them, most of us, between 5 and 10 years old when we were kids, and they're still functioning. So the integral operating system is a new set of mental models, or a new set of frameworks that we can install that really allow us to see really the full potential of anything, see the full potential of ourselves as individuals, see the full potential of a field like recovery or education. And we can see the areas that are untouched and unaddressed, and the areas that are addressed, so that we can kind of identify what needs some attention. And it also reframes everything into a growth context. And I think that's one of the most important insights about it, is that prior to really having a really strong understanding of how these things work, a lot of people view themselves as fixed and kind of unchangeable beings. So they'll say something like, I'm not a musical person, or I'm not an athletic person, or I'm not a singer. But when you have the integral operating system as part of your worldview, those phrases kind of lose meaning, and and it starts to say, I haven't developed the capacity of
Yeah.
singing.
Yeah.
I haven't developed the capacity. I haven't put attention and time and energy into my physical health and well-being and my physical capacities. It's not that I am not an athletic person and I'm a fixed being in that way. I exist in a growth context.
Let me say something. I love that explanation. It's so inspiring. And most of us learn, numbers and learn to read when we were very young. I remember just aching to read these big books in my parents' house. But we learned as children, most of us. And so we think, oh, we just kind of accept that we read and stuff. Can you imagine what it would be like if you couldn't read or you couldn't count? You'd be so disconnected from civilization, from the human world. And I've spent so many hours in books and great fiction, maybe lousy fiction too, and history and philosophy. It's completely changed, my world, informed my inner world. And to imagine myself all of a sudden not having that, it's just like unbelievable. And that's what happened. Most of us learn the superhuman operating system as adults. And so we can remember what it was like to run around before it. We're just bumping into things going, what the hell is going on in the universe? This makes no sense. And it is as dramatic as that, is as dramatic as learning to read or learning about numbers as an inner operating system. It changes it that much. And people who know it, you can get to the heart of things because there's just a shorthand. You don't have to beat around the bush. Levels and lines. That's just a shorthand. It's like explains a whole bunch about human behavior and developmental issues that we have and we see all over the place. That's just one little thing. And so I just think that the how dramatic it is and the way you explain that. I've never heard anybody explain it quite that way before. And that's brilliant.
Yeah. And I mean, it's kind of, I feel the same way. I remember when I learned to read when I was a kid, about 6 months after I learned to read, I was so excited about how revolutionary this was that I started trying to teach all of the other kids around me how to read too. Like, you have to get this. This is amazing. We can read. So my younger brother is 2 years younger than me, and I'm sitting there with my little picture book next to him trying to point out, how letters work. And if you can imagine 2,000 years ago when people were learning to read as adults or in areas where they're learning to read as adults right now, how much it causes a dramatic shift in their life and is a huge aha, because it really gives us access to a whole new dimension of reality. All of a sudden, once you learn how to read, you have access to the entire, all of the world's knowledge, anything that's written down anywhere, the internet. So it's huge. And these technologies, I think that's why the evangelical fervor that you were talking about earlier happens for people. It's kind of like when you learn to read as a kid, you get all excited about it and what it opens up for you, that it causes that same kind of energy and enthusiasm. You're not still doing that, many years later about reading. You're not running around telling everybody how significant it is that they learn to read. And yet it's still a part of your life every single day. So you're still using it every single day. And
I just assume that everybody I meet knows how to read. I mean, at least in the United States, there's some parts of the world no, but here it's just an assumption. And
and I think the same thing is true for a lot of people who really start to integrate the superhuman operating system and start to apply it in their day-to-day living and how they interpret the world. Imagining life prior to it starts to become really difficult, of like, how did I ever make sense of things without this? So
I didn't.
I didn't really. There's a lot more confusion happening. So and that's the kind of thing. I mean, we're getting letters from people all the time who graduate the course that are exactly on the same page. People are telling us, like, this is the greatest map of consciousness ever created. This is the most comprehensive, in-depth of explanation of everything, period. The most quality course ever made. It's ridiculous, off the chart stuff, but it's not us. It's really Ken. Ken Ken has done an amazing feat for humanity with his effort to try to discern this information. And when he, sat down in his office with, all the world's knowledge mapped out on hundreds of legal pads.
Yeah, and there were some earlier iterations of this where people tried to get it out there, and it just didn't work. It was just too complicated. They weren't put together. So there's a genius in being able to communicate this where people can actually understand it.
Yeah, well, we set out to try to order and present the content that Ken teaches in a different way of presenting the information, which I think has been really helpful for a lot of people learning the material. Ken is a genius philosopher. He's a genius author and a genius writer, and a lot of his material, he covers a lot of information, and a lot of it's really mind-blowing. And so one of the things that we did with Superhuman OS is that we kind of chose to leave all of the stuff that Ken does go into as something available for students who are more interested in, and then focus on a primary track of the essentials of what understanding the basics of the operating system are. So that's what Superhuman OS is. And it really, it really impacts people's life. It's a huge honor to be a part of it.
Yeah, and I would say anybody who's listening to this, what you should do is you should sign up for the 10-week course, and then come back if you've already listened to all the interviews. But once you have that integrated, once you've downloaded the operating system, then you go back and see how all these technologies that we've been exploring in the summit, you begin to see how they fit in to the bigger picture. So they're not just these little isolated things that can change your brain chemistry or change your this, that, or the other. You begin to see how it works in the whole big sweeping picture, down from the very personal to the very universal. And it'll just change everything the way you understand this summit if you just download this thing.
Yeah.
Brain.
Yeah. Actually, I think one of the things that I often use to clarify one of the aspects of Ken's framework, which we can touch on briefly on this call. I'm not the teacher, Ken's the teacher. So I just want to make sure that if you want to learn this stuff, you learn it from Ken. But he's got 5 core mental models, and they're levels, lines, states, types, and quadrants. And one of the things that I use when I'm talking to people about quadrants, and really how or we call them dimensions in the Superhuman Operating System, how to understand the different dimensions. One of the examples is what you guys do at iAwake, which is with binaural beats, you're doing something in one dimension, the upper right dimension, the exterior dimension, that affects, that is correlate to another dimension, which is the interior dimension, or the inner dimension. And the technology, the exterior technology changes the interior experience in the framework. It changes your state of consciousness, and it starts to change your brain, which changes your experience of the world.
Yeah, and as far as being a teacher, when I started doing, integral recovery, or filling up our house with addicts and some of, anyway. So I had all these videos they sent me from Integral Life, or what it was back then. It was Integral Naked, the first iteration, the first website they had. And I said, man, I got all these great things of Ken and all these people talking. I'll just put it on the students who'll just like absorb it. And I turned it on. It was like way, way, way above their heads. And so I, for necessity, had to become a teacher of this stuff, and to present it in ways that people could really grok it. And one of my nicknames in the integral world is "Dumb It Down Dupuy," and people say that I've made it very simple that most people can get it. And then before that even, I was teaching it to teenagers in wilderness programs. So I'd sit down and I said, my thing to get everybody's attention, I said, if you understand it, if you grok this, you will never see the world in the same way. Never. And they're like, a bunch of teenagers, like, yeah, right, whatever. And so I lay it out, and they would just have these moments where, the scales would fall off their eyes. They would just go, oh my God. They just start to see it. Afterwards, it's like, well, why the hell hasn't anybody told us this before? And I said, well, because nobody knew it before, it's brand new. And they're going, huh, so I actually became, explaining it. And let's just talk about the 4 quadrants. Okay. And maybe we're going to use stuff when we edit this, it'll be up there on the screen.
Well, let's start with the other ones first.
Wow, this is a revolution for me. I've always started with the 4 quadrants. So yeah, let's go with it the way you guys do it.
Yeah, we actually put the quadrants last because the quadrants actually and the dimensions contain everything. So, and all of the other 4 exist in the quadrants. So we have found that it helps people get quadrants a lot more when they understand the other 4 elements first. So so when you can talk about levels and lines in quadrants, it helps understand how they work a little bit more. So that's the way we've done it. So I'm going to go through them real quick, and then we can pick up right where you stop. If that sounds good to you. So the Superhuman Operating System, Ken's framework, is levels, lines, states, types, and quadrants. So I talked about that briefly. And then Ken will actually go into this a lot more. But really, levels is a significant thing to understand. And a lot of people who've played any video games at all kind of have touched this concept because the characters in video games improve their capacities and their development through levels in the game. They go up a level and they're a better character. And what researchers starting about 50 years ago started discovering is that this is while it's a fun idea in video games and a novel idea in video games, it's an actual scientific reality in humans. And there are specific levels that we all evolve through. Every single person goes through the same levels of development. And these have been researched and identified in what these levels are and that we're growing through. And so I'm not going to go through what they all are. Ken does a really great job of that. He does a much better job than I would. But we all grow through the same levels. And actually, when we start to be able to see that we're growing through levels, it actually helps us to continue the progress through the levels. Much like in video games, if you're playing a video game and you're aware that your character is growing through levels, you can try to develop new capacities. But if you're not aware, you might think you're done playing.
And if you think you're the top of the food chain, as it were, that's kind of a nice, smart place to be. But when you look up, oh my God, there's a lot of growth and a lot of work that needs to be done. It can be kind of overwhelming, but ultimately inspiring.
Yeah.
It can give direction to how you live your life.
Yeah. And it can kind of, one of the things is that we all grow through the same levels, but we can stop. We can stop growing and we can just rest on the level that we're at for the rest of our life. Or we can keep growing. And when we start to see the future growth potential, it gets very exciting and inviting. And then, so that goes into the other one, which is lines, which is related to levels, which is that we have multiple intelligence, multiple capacities that are growing through levels of development. So there's a diverse array of them. This idea was kind of first touched on by Howard Gardner with multiple intelligences. But these are not, again, fixed. It's not that you're, smart in this area and stupid in this area. It's that you're on a developmental trajectory and you're more developed in this area and less developed in this area. And that when we start to see kind of the full spectrum of what we are growing through and where we are in certain areas, we then get to have a little bit more freedom with choosing to consciously choose how we grow. And that's what's so powerful about the Superhuman Operating System, is that rather than becoming a fixed person who just becomes this one way for the rest of our life and runs into the same problems over and over again because we keep on creating the same conditions for ourselves, we can identify an area where we have some growth issues and decide that's what I'm going to focus on now. And then once you develop capacities and new skills and grow that line of development, it's permanent. You've changed. as a person. So then you can change your focus and start developing a different area in your life. It's not just going to you're not going to collapse back to the way you were 20 years ago. So
yeah,
that's
it's like you're kind of building like floors in a building. And once you have the fourth floor, I mean, you can always go there, say you have an elevator or stairs. Now, you may wake up in the morning on the first floor before you had your coffee or something, but you have really quick access to higher levels,
Yeah, before I've had my coffee, I'm on the first floor. I'm in survival mode.
And in my work, these lines of development, and they're vertical lines, so we can measure, the really low, really high, and certain lines at the really low, you're going to have pathology and suffering. Like your physical body line. If that's really bad, man, you're going to be sick. You're not going to be able to move around in the world, have any energy or vitality. So an integral recovery, an integral practice, we talk about the physical line, the intellectual line, like downloading this operating system, the emotional line where you deal with your emotions, your traumas, your hurts, your yucky stories about yourself, your assumptions about yourself and reality that may not be very functional. And then you have the spiritual line. And so you got to have a practice ongoing. You work those four things the rest of your life. And then you have really kind of holistic, healthy growth to these higher stages of development. And when you have that foundation, then you can apply the discipline and the healthiness that you've achieved to any other capacity you want to develop. If you want to be a great guitarist, you might say, my guitars and stuff. I've really, the discipline that I developed in my brain functioning at a higher level through the operating system and through the practices have made it now where I have the confidence that I can almost take on anything that I really want to and apply myself to it and realize I'm going to stumble, not be very good at first, but just keep pushing myself. And my brain starts changing and my capacity starts changing very quickly. And it's incredibly inspiring.
Yeah.
It's how empowered we really are with the right map and the right tools and the right discipline, how we can transform ourselves and hence transform the world.
Yeah. I mean, it's really amazing. And that's one of the reasons why we lovingly call it the Superhuman Operating System, because when we start to look at our lives in this growth context, and we can measure our growth in these lines. So in the Superhuman Operating System 10-week training, Ken goes through the cognitive, the interpersonal, the emotional, the somatic, the moral, the spiritual, and the willpower line of development. And these are all growth areas. And he covers what each stage of that development looks like. So we can start to identify where we are. I can recognize, I'm doing really well in the cognitive line of development, but I need much more development in, say, my physical somatic line of development. I could work a lot more on that, or my willpower line of development, something like that. We can start to identify that one's solid. I can let that one be for a while, and I can focus on those ones. But without this context, most people tend to stick with their strongest line of development and rely completely on it for every aspect of life. But that line of development has evolved for a specific narrow part of life, and it can't be relied on for everything. We need to develop this diverse array of capacities, and that's why we call it the Superhuman Operating System, because we start to understand when we look at all of these different lines of development that each one of them has really high levels where amazing things are able to be accomplished, and we can be on a path where we're starting to develop towards those in the areas where we want to.
Yeah, and of course in my work in I Awake is helping people to very rapidly develop a deep interior practice, and the deep interior practice can be a really spooky, scary place, especially if you don't have a good map. And one of the things that the Superhuman Operating System does is gives you that internal map. So when things start happening, you actually know what's going on and why it's useful. And you're also able to, at least I'll make an I statement, I'm able to deconstruct my own bullshit really quickly, using the maps, like, okay, all right,
Yeah.
But not only can I deconstruct it quickly, I can reconstruct it quickly too. People talk
Yeah.
about deconstructing reality. Well, that's good, but the second step is reconstructing it in a better, more skillful, beautiful, compassionate way. And this is what this map does.
Yeah, that's one of the really exciting things about it. Like, deconstructing things that aren't working is very essential. Not falling for our own BS, not believing our lies, but also being generative and creating better alternatives.
Absolutely.
And that kind of creativity is one of the things that we have access to when we start discovering the flexibility that's available to us in our growth and our development. And so I'm just going to jump to the next one, because you started sitting on it, is states of consciousness, or states. And that's really one of the things that I Awake really helps with is state development. So one of the things that Ken covers and really sheds a lot of light on, for a lot of people, this one is just game changing. States of consciousness are the different states of awareness that are available for us. Most of us experience waking, dreaming, and deep sleep every single day. But there's a broad spectrum of states that are accessible to us. And it's kind of like you were saying with the floors, once you build it, you can go there. With states, once you know the path to a state and you can get there, then you can go there more often. But as long as you haven't developed a practice or an inner capacity to access that state of consciousness, it's not very accessible to you. You can spontaneously end up there on accident.
Yeah, and using that, and we said about I Awake, you can develop you go through all kinds of states of consciousness just in your sitting meditation. And if you accept and understand what states are, like a student of mine said, don't make a philosophy out of it. If you're feeling depressed, a lot of people have.
Yeah.
Don't make a philosophy. It's just a state. It comes and it goes, and it'll shift. But by experiencing these states fully and completely with mindfulness and the witness self that develops in meditation, they actually can become the raw energy and the building blocks of higher stages of development, which is what we're really trying to do in practice. And back in the 60s and all that, we didn't know. We were taking LSD or whatever we were doing, and we'd have these great states, and man, God and non-duality and all that was really clear, and completely deconstruct everything that was going on in Washington and on the television set and stuff. So we had all these states, but we didn't understand that states are just states. They come and they go, and they can be informative, but we'd come off the LSD or we'd come off the high, and then we were the same old messed up jerks that we were before, but maybe even worse, because now we deconstructed a lot of our stuff. We knew these higher levels existed, but we didn't know how to live there except by taking more drugs. And we all know how that turned out, Yeah. So now that we understand that, and we have the spiritual technologies that allow us to use these states in a healthy way, and understanding they're not ends in themselves, but they are the bricks to build the higher structures of our own inner development, then it just changes the whole story.
Yeah, it's huge. And I think that's one of the really important points that Ken makes in the course. State training or state development really is something that allows us and grow through the levels much faster. And he talks about the significance of meditation a lot, about that meditation. A regular meditation practice is something that helps us grow in levels of development much faster. So when we're trying to cultivate new capacities and develop to higher levels of development within ourselves, a solid meditation practice is a significant piece of that. And that's part of what he calls integral life practice, which we can touch on more later. But just like with levels, where Ken goes through what the research says about levels, and then all the lines, what all the research says about all the lines, Ken has done the same thing and kind of brought together all of the world's traditions and goes through very clearly what the spectrum of consciousness is, what the states of consciousness are accessible, and how we evoke them and experience them. And that's what Ken covers in that dimension in the Superhuman Operating System. So states of consciousness and states, and I'm saying states of consciousness, but when we get to quadrants, states exist in all dimensions. So this is in the self, but there's also brain states, and
Sure.
there are cultural states. I mean, a mob is a state, like
Yeah.
a collective state that takes over. Team spirit is a state that happens. So we'll get more into that later. But states, like having flexibility and knowledge of this terrain, is extremely freeing and extremely game changing. And for anybody who has either had a lot of experience with spiritual practice or been jaded by spiritual practice because of their exposure to limiting religious traditions, it's tremendously opening, because it allows us to see what a lot of religious traditions are trying to give you the tools to access and get you to, but it allows us to see it in a context that is free from all of the dogma. So
That's right.
a lot of traditions are trying to give you the tools to access certain states of consciousness, but then they tell you all of this other stuff that's part of thousands of years of dogma that has developed around that. And instead, just understanding the states of consciousness themselves that are accessible to you, you're kind of freed to travel in them more freely without having to take on all of that dogma.
Yeah, and that's what we talk about as post-metaphysical spirituality. You know, you're actually having the real experience that Rumi was writing about, all the great mystics were writing about, but without all the theological framework. I mean, you can choose that framework if you want, you know, God bless. It's, you know, good for you, but you don't have to. You know, you can go straight to the source, and then you can, you know, do whatever you want with that. And Ken says sometimes that how you interpret these deep, powerful states of consciousness that are now accessible through the spiritual technologies that we're talking about to most of us, if we'll use this stuff, it's what you do with it. Okay, so hopefully you'll move out into the world with more wisdom, more compassion, more connectedness, and as you move up these stages, working with these states, there'll be a decrease in narcissism and decrease in compassion and wisdom and skillfulness. And Einstein also said that you can't solve these problems on the levels they've been created.
Yeah.
So we, you know, I mean, you look at the Middle East, the Sunni and the Shia thing, just one of the problems in the world. Or hell, you look at the Democrats and the Republicans in our country talking, they're reading different books, you know, they're coming from different operating systems. And so that conflict is never going to be solved on the level that it was created. It's going to take people pushing in to these higher levels where we can actually see how it fits together and begin to transcend and include, but heal these things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I want to just say one more thing, referencing back to what you were saying about don't make a philosophy of it. One of the tremendously freeing things about learning about states of consciousness is that you start falling for the lie that they're reality. So when you get triggered by somebody and get really frustrated, or when you get into a depressed state, you start to recognize this is a state of consciousness that I have flexibility with. I can stay in this forever, or I can do something to improve my state. I don't have to believe it. Instead of going into like all of the thoughts that are associated with that and believing them as reality, as that person is a terrible person, or that thing is a terrible thing, or that the world is a terrible place. Those thoughts, they still happen. You can't stop them from happening when you're in this state because they're related to it. But you can start doing something to change your state of consciousness. You can start exercising some freedom instead of getting completely lost into it. And what you said about not making a philosophy of it is so huge, because it's so freeing in how we relate with other people. If I'm having a conversation with my dad and it triggers an old pattern where I all of a sudden am having the same fight I've had with my dad 1,000 times, I don't have to go down that path anymore. And I can actually start having a much different and a much healthier and a much more nourishing relationship with my dad, because I have a little bit more freedom with how I'm participating in it.
Yeah, I think I don't know, yesterday I was in this really grumpy mood in the morning. I was like, "Rrr." And then I just stopped for a second, and I realized my grumpy mood is about this deep, and underneath it, there's this just vastness. And I started laughing at myself, and it just kicked me out of this, a moment of mindfulness and self-awareness. And I was just able to, not taking myself too seriously.
Yeah.
And, then I started moving from a better level. It was just like an instant kind of recalibration of my inner state.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually had the very similar experience yesterday as well. I had a disagreement with somebody, and it was starting to get really frustrating for me. And then I listened to profound meditation. I was like, okay, I'm not going down a good path in my state of consciousness right now. I'm gonna take a break here. And I went and sat down with profound meditation. And 20 minutes later, I re-engaged that person, and we got into a really collaborative vibe, and we accomplished a lot yesterday instead of having, building on that initial state, which probably had something to do with the fact that I hadn't yet meditated.
No.
And I hadn't yet eaten breakfast. So I hadn't really taken proper care of my state of consciousness. But understanding that gave me the freedom to do something about it.
Yeah, now we're starting to talk about the practical application, because, this is very lofty, universally mind-blowing stuff, but it's also very grounded, whether it's talking to your dad. Ken used to joke about, I think you're enlightened, go home for the holidays.
Yeah.
Like, man, you've been working on yourself. You're pretty cool. And you go home and over a Christmas dinner or Hanukkah dinner or whatever, it's just like,
yeah, it's always where the rubber meets the road. Yeah.
So I've really used this in my family situation.
Yeah, and that's one of the things. What we really try to do differently with Superhuman OS than a lot of other ways that Ken's work has taught is that we have, with every single one of these dimensions, we have worked with an integral coach to design a practice that makes it very practical and real and interactive with how you interact with the world. So one of the things about levels is that when we're working with levels, we start to recognize, or lines, that we start to recognize that a lot of the conflicts that we have and a lot of the issues that we have are from the fact that we are in different areas on different levels, and we're trying to communicate with people who are on a different level in a different dimension. And we're not seeing eye to eye because of that. And we don't have to be in conflict about that. Instead, we can get inquisitive about what the wisdom of what they are at has to share with us. And so it changes the way that we interact with the world. It changes the way that we interact with coworkers, changes the way that we interact with political disagreements. It changes the way that we interact with family during the holidays. Once we start to understand how to really integrate the material. And that's why we say it is a psychoactive operating system. Once you really start to grok it, once you really get it, when you put in the time to do it, like if I were to tell you what the letters are and the sound that they make is, that doesn't mean you instantaneously know how to read. You actually have to put in a little bit of work to integrate it. But once you've integrated it, you don't have to do it anymore. If I say what letter does the sound B make, but it took you like a little practice to get there, and now it's there permanently. So it's the same with levels and lines and states. Once you put in the effort to grok it, which is what the course and the practice is designed around, it changes the way that you interface with reality, which is why it's a new operating system.
Yeah, and it's just so practical. And just understanding levels of development. You go into community, I can just tell what the center of gravity of the community is by the automobiles they drive. Here in deep darkest Utah, where I live in Wayne County, it's all about American pickups. Fords and Dodge Rams and Chevys and and it's a very conservative agricultural area, and they're wonderful people, but I don't walk around in a psychedelic Volkswagen van around here. I kind of just fit in because I don't have anything to prove anymore. And I spent a year and a half in a very conservative area in Texas. And when I was there, I just cut my hair short. I wore jeans, boots, and, Western shirts, and I wore my Army hat around, U.S. Army. It was camouflage things. And I fit right in, people would come up to me and shake my hand and thank you for your service. And, really heartfelt stuff. And then I'd go into Houston and go to Whole Foods, and I'd walk in and be like,
yeah,
what's he doing? They were too polite to say anything, but it's like, he doesn't quite fit in here. You can just tell by fashions and all the different artifacts that are produced by the different levels of consciousness what field you're in, and you learn to speak to people in a language they can understand.
Yeah, it gives you a lot of flexibility, And I've heard Ken says it makes people able to function as a chameleon. You can actually go participate in collectives and communities. Because, well, one of the things is, and he goes into this, one of the reasons why we even say superhuman is because starting about 20 years ago, and Ken talks about this on the call that's happening on March 24th, Your Superhuman Potential, is an entirely new stage of development started hitting the planet, which is called the integral stage of development, which is why we keep on using the word integral throughout this conversation. And it's when we start to integrate all of the capacities of each of those prior levels. It's where we start to integrate it. So when we go into an environment in a context where we're actually trying to practice that, where we're trying to practice being integrative and we're trying to practice an integral disposition, we no longer are trying to stand in conflict with people. We're actually trying to find out how we can integrate their worldview with our own in a healthy way. And so when somebody's driving around with pickup trucks and it's not in conflict with the Whole Foods organic food shopper, because there is a value there. There's a value around community and family and tradition that is an important and significant value that we can start to learn to appreciate instead of be in conflict with, and to integrate in our own lives and start to recognize the significance of family to us and the significance of tradition to us and all of that stuff. So it becomes amazingly empowering. And also, because of that, people at the integral stage of development tend to accomplish a significant amount because they have access to huge networks of people, because they can function as a chameleon. They can speak all these different languages. And I'm not talking about like Chinese and English. I'm talking about, they can speak conformist, and they can speak progressive, and they can speak all these different languages and find common ground with people, which allows for a lot of cooperation and collaboration. So it's extremely empowering and allows people to do amazing stuff. And
I, for example, when I was in my teenage years in early 20s, I was very, fundamentalist Christian, devout. Man, I memorized tons of verses of Bibles and stuff and all this. And I grew out of that. And a long time I rejected all of that. Oh, that was stupid. And now it's like, I have this great gift, that I can really communicate to people. And of course I have all these verses and they come back and I understand them from different levels of understanding now. But yeah, I can go into a very conservative community and speak in the language of faith and scripture and God bless. And, let's pray about this. And it's true. I do pray about things. It's not the way I prayed back when I was a teenager, but my own inner practice has developed into a very real thing for me. So I can come from that place of being genuine and not trying to convert them to another level, but really being present with them on that particular level. And if you go into a bunch of businessmen, that we call it the modern or the orange, there's different ways of looking at it. You don't start talking like a preacher in a church. You talk in terms of profits and business and markets and statistics and all this stuff, success, these sort of things. So.
Yeah. It's really cool. I also have a similar background with Christianity, but another fun thing that I had a great experience was, is I'm interested in community development, and I'm really fascinated by the subject of how communities grow and connect and evolve. That's part of what Superhuman OS is about, is building a community of people that are on the same things. But I discovered that there is a Christian denomination that is, while a lot of Christian churches are dying because of their practices are becoming irrelevant for modern generations. There are some that are growing really fast. And there's one called The Vineyard that I actually really appreciate. And I went and spent 9 months as a practicing member of a Vineyard church and going 3 days a week.
Nice.
And because I have the framework of integral, I wasn't concerned about confusing the gifts that they were offering with some of the dogma that was associated with it.
Absolutely.
And so I had the opportunity to really interact in a really intimate way with this amazing community and discover a lot about the gifts that they're bringing into community and what they're creating that really creates an amazingly safe and nurturing space for people. But not getting lost in it. And it was really amazing for me, but it was also amazing because as a result of having the flexibility that Integral allowed for, I was able to continually participate in that community and speak the same language without doing anything that ever made me feel like I was out of integrity with my values, because I had my own way of interpreting the same scripture, but the significance of it was still there for both of us.
And you can allow people to be where they're at and treat them with respect without playing some kind of head game, trying to change it. When I was in Texas, I went for a year and a half to a very conservative Episcopal church with my parents. And first I was like, I felt my little teenager like rejecting all this stuff. And then I just, surrendered to it. And, after church, they'd have coffee hour and everybody would get together. And I left, and I still miss these people. Great affection for them. And the kindness and the support and the love they have for one another and how they're trying to live their lives in good ways to the best of their abilities. Tremendous, it was a beautiful experience. And I never mentioned Ken Wilber, integral, or, meditation and all the stuff I'm doing. I was just there with these people, and it was beautiful.
Yeah, that's one of the really cool things when you start to look at your own, and we'll go to the next two things in a second, but when you start to look at your own integral map, your own aqua map, what we call the spectrograph in Superhuman OS, you start to realize that we're all kind of like fingerprints. We're all completely unique. We all have different areas where we're developed and undeveloped. Nobody is at the top of all lines. There's not a single person alive that is, fully actualized potential.